today is Ivo Martins, and he was actually supposed to have joined us in the spring term already in person, but for obvious reasons, plans had to be rearranged. But we are glad to have him with us here today now. Ivo comes from the University of Leiden's Institute for Area Studies and has a background in ancient history, researching late Babylonian cuneiform scholarship and the reactions of Babylonian scholars to Achaemenid domination. And today he's going to talk about Babylonia, 539 BCE, the world against Nabonidus. So please, Ivo.
Hello everyone. Thank you for the invitation and also the revival of this session in this new format. I will today address the issue of identity based on a composition from first millennium BC Babylonia, which is a literary composition and was previously known as the Persian verse account of Nabonidus by the first publication by Sidney Smith in 1924. More recently is known as the verse account, and the most recent translation of this composition was published by Hans-Peter Schodig in 2001. My exploration will take an anthropological and literary perspective. On the one hand, I will be reading the text within the framework of liminality and the associated concepts of communitas and otherness. And on the other hand, the inquirer is obviously limited to the type of data that the literary composition can provide. Specifically, we are talking about literary projections rather than social realities. The implication is that such projections are necessarily different from those realities. First, because they are formatted by the point of view and also by the mental framework of the composer. And secondly, because they are also subordinated to the form, the genre, and the traditional themes and tropes of cuneiform literature. Our text is preserved in a single cuneiform tablet, BM 38299, presently kept at the British Museum, and it is part of a collection that houses about 2,000 tablets of different types, since economic contracts to literary and scholarly compositions, which came from Borsippa and Babylon, according to the economic texts that are dated. Only half of the composition is preserved. So we are missing, for instance, 2 and almost 4 entire columns, and those columns are the middle of the text of the composition, but they represent the rise of the tension in the plot, and they are very important, but we simply don't have them. The composition is written in verse, and it draws inspiration from historical events of the reign of Nabonidus and the conquest of the city of Babylon by Cyrus II in 539 BCE. The tablet creates a coin or mirror effect. This is not extraordinary in cuneiform tablets, but what we can see is that the tablet on the obverse matches the columns on the reverse on its content. On the obverse, we have a very negative tone and mention of events of Nabonidus' reign. Whereas in the reverse, we have a positive tone and a description of Cyrus' conquest of Babylon. And indeed, the comparison between these two kings is an important feature of the composition, which will follow us in the exploration of the text. But first, we should look at the framework, conceptual framework of liminality. And this liminality as a concept was developed by anthropologist Victor Turner in the 1960s, based on the rites de passage from Arnold van Gennep, and also on field observation of populations, tribes in Central Africa. Liminality essentially describes the social mechanisms of change, transition and growth, which can be political, such as the enthronement of a new king, biological, the reaching of adulthood, or natural, the change of seasons, the change of a year. Although it is necessary for social renewal, liminality carries with it a potential danger for society. The danger is explained by the tension between the concepts of communitas and otherness. These concepts were coined by Turner, and they basically refer to inclusion versus exclusion. When entering a liminal experience, the liminal subject, which could be an individual or a group, breaks all previous social ties and exists and exits the larger social community. He then enters in a stage of in-betweenness or otherness, and ideally, the subject will complete the liminal phase, will learn the values and relearn the values of society, and later he will rejoin the larger society with a different social status. However, there is the possibility that the subject is either lost in the process and stays in permanent marginality, or that once reaggregated in society, slowly destroys and overturns the traditional values and norms from that society. This is generally in the case of groups. And this idea of liminality in ritual and in literature is represented by a specific imagery, such as the mention of boundaries, walls, doors, entrances, of journeys, paths, roads, and descriptions of transformative experience and moments, and also direct descriptions of marginality and isolation. In ancient Mesopotamia, liminality is present, although it's a concept that is rarely used in Assyriology. The idea of rites of passage and initiation are well attested and well studied within Assyriology. Consequentially, we know that liminal practices which impacted society, Babylonian society in this case, were not alien to ancient Mesopotamia. A point in case is the initiation ritual used on the consecration of Babylonian prebendary priests, as well as the hierarchical access limited by zones and gates within the temple, which was, for instance, described by Caroline Varzegers in 2011 regarding the temple of Nabu in Borsippa. And also in literature, we have the case of Ludul Bel Nemeki, which is a composition similar to Job, to the biblical Job, and which describes the voyage of a liminal subject, which is isolated from society and then rejoins society after that liminal period. So liminality is not just a tool, a modern tool, a modern concept. It was something that was understood in the Babylonian context. And in our text, the M38-299, we see this structure first on the obverse, which represents separation. And in the plot, it can be identified through imagery, and also we can see that this mental framework is at work in the composition. In the obverse, we see then the progressive isolation of Nabonidus. First, moral isolation. He is distancing himself, so it's self-isolation of Nabonidus. Moral isolation regarding the distancing from conventional social norms and values. For example, creating improper values, improper statues and temples, performing improper rituals, and even stopping traditional festivals like the New Year festival. And also social isolation, because he does not hear the advice of his advisors. He is left by his personal gods, and also the people are suffering with his rule. And this culminates first with the physical isolation of Nabonidus, which is the withdrawal of society, and precisely from Babylon, which Nabonidus leaves to Tema in North Arabia, in the North Arabian Peninsula. Symbolically, the process is also culminated by the destruction of Nabonidus' identity, memory, and name, which in fact is never mentioned in the preserved part of the composition that we have. On the reverse, when we turn the tablet upside down, we can see the opposite. We can see the progressive inclusion of Cyrus II into Babylonian society. First, physically, which is not preserved in the tablet, but he is acting in Babylon when the text resumes. And also in social terms, he gets access to the assemblies, is accepted by the royal officials, he receives the approval of the gods. And also moral integration, because he serves to reassert conventional moral values and norms by taking up the performance of traditional rites, and also apparently including the resumption of the New Year festival at Babylon. Finally, Cyrus is credited with the completion of the Imgur-Enlil wall at Babylon, and this signifies the restoration of the social status quo endangered by Nabonidus. To sum up, the structure of BM 38-299 can be read as a rite de passage, with Nabonidus on the obverse, representing the phase of separation, and with Cyrus and the reverse, representing the phase of reaggregation. Most likely, the the four columns that are lost to us in the middle of the composition would not only represent the confront between these two characters, but also the phase of in-betweeners. Finally, we can also look at the idea of communitas and otherness, and this tension is used to heighten this dichotomy between the phases of separation and reaggregation. While several groups which have different social, cultural, and ethnic identities are introduced to the narrative, such as the people of Tema, the people of Babylon, the assemblies of Babylon, and the gods, which are not all from Babylonian tradition. However, despite these different identities being mentioned, their characterization is terse and, more importantly, bipolar. On the obverse, all groups are described as under distress and misery. On the reverse, all groups are described as enjoying well-being, as being in agreement and living in harmony, and specifically in harmony also with Cyrus. So no distinctions can be emphasized or can be identified between these groups. They are all part of a single communitas, from which the only character which is excluded is Nabonidus. Nabonidus is the only representation of otherness or alterity in the entire composition. Yes, it is clear that this is a literary projection. In contrast with other texts from cuneiform tradition, such as royal inscriptions, in which distinct cultural, ethnic, and social corporative identities are recognized, the composer of BM 38299 capitalized on this contrast to further downgrade the status of Nabonidus. So in conclusion, BM 38299 serves to isolate Nabonidus by denying him the right to belong to the Babylonian community at large, by distancing him from all other groups and characters. Secondly, Nabonidus and Cyrus represent two sides of the same liminal process. They are the same liminal subject which underwent separation and afterwards reaggregation into society. Notions of identity are manipulated and effaced from the text to create these communitas of those that were wronged by Nabonidus. Finally, the liminal imagery and mental framework used in the composition can serve as a circumstantial evidence for a priestly context of production of BM 38299, which was already assumed and on the grounds of other textual data. Well, thank you for your attention, and I will look forward for the questions.